So welcome to, have I done something? Weapons of Choice. This is the series, so media studies series that we run each year. And this year we're presenting Acts of Drawing over today and tomorrow as a 2-day series looking at, as the name suggests, focusing on drawing. And today's sessions were focused around pencil, so it was called Act 1, the pencil, focusing around the idea of hand drawing. And tomorrow, Act 2, code, being a kind of concentration on maybe the emerging territories of the drawing, those drawings that spring from code, and questioning whether the drawing's been lost, or maybe it's merely taken leave of the paper and ventured into virtual, immersive, interactive, and generative territories. Or perhaps this is no longer drawing at all, even. So these are the questions we will ask tomorrow. And these events coincide with the History and Critical Thinking exhibition next door on the Sketch in the AA Gallery. So we've been lucky enough to be surrounded by drawings from the AA archive in there. And also Mark and Parveen's analysis series. So there seems to be a kind of strange, fresh appetite for discussion about the drawing happening. And I wondered if maybe this is a mourning for something, or perhaps we're witnessing just a kind of coming of age of digital technology, maybe an emergence out of the adolescence or the difficult teenage years of the digital, where maybe ever more sophisticated in its relationship to the body, it edges closer to the dreams or our memories of the hand-drawn, not further away. And so, Tanya Kovacs, I couldn't think of a more perfect person actually to invite along for this session, to kind of finish off today's session on looking at hand drawing. I first came across her work through an installation that was in the National Natural History Museum, but it's about a decade ago now, where she took a slice from a 200-year-old tree and installed it in the space. So she's most known for her sculptures, large-scale installations and temporal works about landscape. And it's taken me so long to invite you is actually a crime, I think. And in her own practice, but also in her teaching, she's concerned with drawing, and through her books on drawing, the Drawing Book, and most recently, Drawing Water, in what drawings are capable of, and in all their magical diversity. So Drawing Water features drawings by map makers, writers, shipbuilders, whalers, soldiers, sailors, artists, archaeologists, cartographers, scientists, uranographers, which I had to look up as a kind of celestial cartography, that's what Wikipedia told me, engineers and dreamers. And in her words, a diverse selection, united by the sense that in making the drawing, they are all looking for something. So on that note, it's a nice place to end. Please welcome Tanya Kovacs.
Thank you, Kate. So I've just got a very short statement that talks about my kind of personal relationship with drawing, called Something Against Nothing. Make a mark, leave a trace, just something against nothing. Drawing for me provides a focus, something to rest on, a place to drop anchor. Giving time and space to the drawing is giving time to worry away at something until it's resolved. This unique physical and mental activity and creative absorption allows a space to open in the stream of thoughts and emotion that clutter my mind. Through drawing, I access my being mind over my thinking mind. It's a portal into my intuitive understandings, slowing down with clarity to witness, to care, communicate, celebrate, be curious, trust a dream, see the beauty of small things in ways that help me live and endure. The invisible becomes visible and communicable. I understand through drawing that the process is more important than the product. How the drawing is made needs to be congruent with what the drawing means. Through the drawing, I see the importance of not judging, of compassion and sensing connectedness. I cultivate patience and wait for the drawing to be what it wants to be. I develop perspective, distance, and intimacy. I try to be present, be playful, and be brave. In drawing, I appreciate my thinking hand, the knowledge and wisdom that lives in the body, in the mind's eye, a creative, courageous, liquid self. I move towards what I know and understand, and I move away from what I know and understand. That is my something against nothing. So it's meant to be something else. Where's the technical part? Oh, there it is. So my relationship with drawing was very personal as an artist. Should we dim the lights a little? Just realised there's quite a lot of light actually on the screen. Can that one go? Can that one go? Drawings don't reproduce that well, so we'll be fighting screen quality. Okay, is that going to keep happening? Right. I'll try not to touch anything except the button. So I was given the Henry Moore Drawing Fellowship in 2004. My practice is mainly in sculpture, but I've always drawn, since a child. I got bored very easily as a kid, and drawing seemed to satisfy that kind of sense of boredom. There was always something to do. Being given the Henry Moore Drawing Fellowship acknowledged this kind of link between making things and making drawings. And I do tend to think that sculptors make drawings rather than draw drawings. It's not necessarily about making pictures. But during that period of time where I really focused on my own practice, I was invited by Black Dog Publishing to make a drawing book. So my proposition was that I made a commonplace book, which is a Renaissance model of before people had their own libraries. You would have your own book and you would go and kind of copy from the text that you identified with. So you ended up with a book that was full of all the important bits of writing that you found meaningful. And people would get together and exchange their commonplace books. It had various periods of resurgence as a model, and in our world of hyperlinks and the way we kind of collate things and pinboard things, you could argue it's still a model that's fairly active in how we kind of keep records of things that we like, even if we're not quite sure why we like them. So I proposed that I made a commonplace book of drawing that celebrated drawing in its widest form. I've never thought that drawing something just the property of artists. I think it's just a tool of visual communication and manifestation of thinking. And I love the way drawings talk very directly to other drawings. You can make kind of relationships across historical time and across specialism. So I think they're kind of, they can cross boundaries much more easily than lots of other art forms that are more kind of subject to connoisseurship and specific kind of boundaries around practice. So the drawings in the drawing book were kind of arranged around certain themes. My first theme was measurement. So I had a William Blake drawing of Isaac Newton, kind of an interesting collision of ways of thinking just with that. Kind of starting off this idea of measuring, because you can't start to draw the world unless you can kind of measure your place within it. This was another Blake drawing of a kind of room within the room. And putting that against a Solowit folded paper drawing, where obviously the concept for the drawing is in the act of folding rather than some sort of representation, and bringing in the grid into play. I included more performative drawings. This is the artist Paul Mccarthy in 1972, dragging himself through white paint in the studio, again measuring that space around him. And this is an Alfred Wegener drawing from the origins of the continent, trying to kind of explain how the landmass was one single landmass that drifted apart, which if you try and verbalize, if you put that into words, it takes a lot of words to make sense of that. And no matter how well you explain it in words, you still haven't proven it. But if you show someone this drawing, you offer them proof. And I think often our relationship with truth is very visual. So I particularly like these sketches. These are John Clarke's drawings from James Hutton's Theory of the Earth. Again, a kind of evidencing how the drawing becomes a kind of proof for the evolution of our thinking. So the systems of showing cross-sections through the land demonstrated time and different kind of eras, which were kind of mind-blowing concepts when these drawings first arrived to discuss our place in relation to time and human history and the history of ideas. And then putting that kind of geological drawing against a drawing that's sort of made itself. It's a seismograph from Caltech. So the drawing is of a kind of catastrophic moment, but it's an incredible drawing as well. And suggesting a kind of more psychological seismic moment in this Louise Bourgeois drawing. So looking at visual kind of relationships between drawings that have come from completely different times, completely different places, and just letting them speak to each other. And inviting the reader of this book to go on that journey with me, and also inviting the reader to make their own kind of sense of connection or collection even of their own drawings that interest them. Another kind of landscape rendering is Smithson's Heap of Language. So this is a heap of words about the land and the mapping process arranged into a mountain. Or Robert Louis Stevenson's map of Treasure Island. He writes about this: no child but must remember laying his head in the grass, staring into the infinitesimal forest and seeing it grow populous with fairy armies. Somewhat in this way, I pored upon my map of Treasure Island. And I believe he made the map before he wrote the story. He needed to kind of orientate the adventure. This is a drawing by Richard Long. Again, you know, there's challenging the status of the drawing. Is it a drawing? Is it an action? Is it a sculpture? 5 stones rolled down a hill in Iceland. I approached him for the work, a line made by drawing, which some of you might know, which is just the line left in the grass. And he was absolutely insistent that that wasn't a drawing and that I wasn't allowed to include it in the book. It was definitely a sculpture, but he said this was a drawing. So I'm running with his definition there. I think this is an extraordinary drawing by Marcel Duchamp, With My Tongue in My Cheek, 1959, pencil, ink, plaster on paper. And one of my favourite drawings in the book, because I have a head full of water at all times, is Auguste Rodin's Nude Woman Sitting Underwater, and the way the page is sort of filled with the liquid that surrounds her. And then that I had talking to this Dürer drawing, which is him remembering a dream of a deluge. So the words describe the dream, and then the dream actually kind of floods the paper as well. So I moved through various themes in the book: the measurement, nature, the urban, the body, and ended with death, because everything ends with death eventually. And that whole incredible tradition of drawing the dying or making death masks is quite extraordinary, and came back to me when my father was dying, and I decided to sit in a hospital room and draw him. I've never looked at the drawing again. Like many of my drawings, they go securely into planchess, never to be seen again. But yes, it's a very strange thing to want to bear witness to a moment like that. I'm just going to show you a little bit of the sort of sculptural work that I was doing at this time. So I was particularly interested in geological landscapes, how landscapes make themselves. So I took kind of landforms where you could see those kind of geological forces, made those in the studio in clay, and then cast them, and then framed them in plinths. So rather than the sculpture sitting on the plinth, the sculpture sat into the plinth. And I made a whole series of these. And these are effectively all landscapes sculpted by water. They're canyons, they're cliff faces, gorges. And my drawing practice was fairly neatly an equivalent of the sculptural practice. The white page of the paper was an equivalent to the white cube or the white plinth. And sometimes I drew my sculptures after I finished them as well, just to look at them more. For an artist whose practice is all based in landscape, I am kind of constantly confronted by the fact I can't draw landscape in the kind of traditional sense of sitting down somewhere and rendering it. I can't make a picture of it. I don't think I even want to, so I've kind of made my peace with that. But I do use mapping a lot and cartographic kind of mechanisms in my drawing practice as a way of drawing landscape. So this was a map I produced with the British Geological Survey of an imaginary island with a fairly kind of testable key that they helped print up. And I've taken mapping symbols into my sculptural practice as well. This is a work, there's a sister to it on the other side of the reservoir up in Kielder in Northumbria. These are sets of drawings that are framed. So each framed work has about 10 different sheets in it. And I'm using the Times Atlas as a source to draw islands from different oceans. So I try and kind of dissolve the cartographic certainty with these maps. These are all the islands of the Arctic Ocean. So the island is also a kind of random ink blot or cataract. And they're shown in various sizes of sets. And I make field drawings as well. So drawings that try and kind of generate themselves, you know, a mark that repeats and fills the page. So less about the object, less about trying to draw the thing, and more about kind of thinking about a surface and a process, not really knowing what's going to happen when I start these drawings either. I think of this piece strangely as a drawing, even though it's obviously an object. It's a work called Meadow, and I brought a wildflower meadow from Bath to London via the inland waterway system. So it's a moving artwork that asks the question, when you move through a landscape, does it move through you? What's that exchange? And it felt like I was tracing this very long watery line from one place to another with the work. Shortly after that work was complete, I was invited to make a work about this drawing, which is a vast chalk drawing in the Downs near Oxford. I was doing a fellowship for the School of Archaeology at Oxford University, and they invited me to respond to the White Horse at Uffington, which is a drawing that's over 2,000 years old and has been in continuous usage, which means people redraw the drawing and have redrawn the drawing for over 2,000 years. They go on the hill and they scrape it off. So this kind of local community around this very, very large drawing have kept it in kind of the public domain. My response to that drawing was to make my own museum of the White Horse that travelled to various locations, including race courses, that had a collection of the White Horse in our material culture. So not looking at it so much archaeologically, archaeology. No, not looking at the archaeology, I can't say the word, but looking at in our kind of current mythology and archetype use of the white horse. And while I was there, I was trained by the archaeological draftsperson at the school to learn how archaeologists draw. There's some really interesting drawing systems around archaeology, some of which do with mapping time and space again, a bit like the geological systems, but different. And then there are also marks to describe particular materials. So when you draw an archaeological find, you draw it at whole scale, so 1-to-1 scale. You have a particular mark, say for flint or bone or all this. So I had to develop a mark for a record of all the white horses, or this little statuette, which is in a kind of polymer. That was Desert Orchid that died during the making of this piece, made front headlines all over the world. This was my mark for paper. And I drew the library that accompanied the White Horse Museum. I draw books quite a lot. I probably draw books more than I read them. Sometimes if it's a really hard book, I think if I draw it, stare at it hard enough, I'm going to absorb it. But I'm still working on that. I then went travelling with my partner, who's also an artist, and our very long-suffering son. And we went to South America for 6 months. He was 8. And again, I was surrounded by the most incredible landscapes travelling through, but I couldn't draw them, but I drew the guidebooks to those landscapes. So my road atlas, my trekking guide, and my very well-thumbed Voyage of the Beagle. While I was there, I'd been invited like 2 nights before I left to make a proposal for the Darwin Bicentenary ceiling, which I did from a camper van in Patagonia. And this drawing was my starting point for my proposal, which is a sketchbook, very, very, very famous page in a Darwin sketchbook. It says at the top of the page, I think, and then that thinking breaks down into an image. A kind of tree-like, coral-like, branching form where he visualizes one of the biggest ideas we've come up with, the theory of evolution. So that was my starting point. For my proposal, I said, can I take a 200-year-old oak tree, slice it through the branches, through the trunk, and through the root, and insert that into the ceiling at the Natural History Museum? I would add, I had no idea if this was possible, but I kind of blagged it for the proposal, and they went with it. So this was the tree. I had to come back, actually, from travelling. I might still be there. But, so we stopped after about 7 months of travelling to come back. This is a tree that came out of a sustainable forest in Longleat, and we planted 200 oak trees to say thank you to this one. It was a huge, vast, three-dimensional living object that had to be chopped up, sliced, numbered, reassembled, because effectively I was asking the tree to draw itself with this slice. I'd taken this slice through it, turning this vast, living, three-dimensional thing into a two-dimensional thing. And this was the drawing that held it all together. If I'd lost this drawing, I wouldn't have been able to put my pieces back together. It gave me a lifelong probably, obsession with wood grain, because you could trace a line from the root up through the trunk and out through the branch. I mean, we all love wood grain on surfaces, but I didn't realise what a continuous drawing, what a line of kind of autobiography there is in a tree. And that's a permanent piece in the Treasures Gallery, and it's also the largest botanical specimen in the museum, as well as an artwork. I drew on trees obsessively from then on. I had various other slices through ancient oak from the same source, and redrew the timelines. And drawing is about time. The time you spend with a drawing is not like any other time. And it slows down time. And yet, the more time you make for drawing, the better it gets, I think. That exchange is a very rich one. This was a piece I made for the Cicely Saunders Institute at King's Hospital. Again, it's working with trees. She set up the hospice movement, and the UK are world leaders on palliative care, care for the dying. So they wanted a piece that kind of reflected certain elements of her philosophy. And I proposed to cast trees. So I cast silver birch trees without their branches, so stripped down to the bone, which is how we are when we're dying. There's not a lot of extra. You're kind of down to your core. And I redrew the bark detail in pen and ink on all these trees. Again, incredibly laborious process of tracing. A lot of the drawing I do, I think, is copying. When I'm not kind of making or process-based, I think I'm copying. So I was copying the marks that were revealed in the tree in pen and ink. I've then made a big decision in my personal life to move out of London, and I now live in the southwest, very, very rurally, in an old mill, so next to a river. So water became a very kind of much more present, foregrounded material in my work. And this is one of the first pieces I made after that move, where I collected water from 100 rivers from around the UK, and they're housed in a boathouse at the art collection in Scotland called Jupiter Artland. From that water piece, I went on to make a bigger water piece for the Fruit Market Gallery. It was also in Edinburgh. This is all the seas, and I wanted to gather water from all the world's seas and bring them to one place. And I relied on the generosity of a global network of seawater collectors to do this. People sent me water from all around the world, including two guys that were rowing across the Atlantic, sent me a bottle from somewhere in the middle. Obviously not until they got back to the other side. But a piece that became about, that started off about my relationship with water and my ideas about the liquid self and identity in water, became this kind of collective and, extremely generous collection of other people's relationship to the sea. Whilst making that work, I was making another kind of collection, which is this collection of drawings about water. This was another kind of wandering journey that I chose to make through our vast visual record for sightings of the sea. The book became a log of my own drawing practice and reflection on others. It's my portalon, which is a very particular sort of drawing, a chart drawn from the sea. They're hand-drawn by sailors since medieval times that are part of kind of navigational aids. So what the land looks like when you're on the sea. Looking for the sea in our visual record, not just artists drawing the sea, cartographers, explorers, people working the sea. The sea is a social political territory and part of a colonial kind of expansion plan. And also trying to embrace the idea of drawing itself as exploration, an open-ended proposition and its own rich territory. So again, I started with Blake. I think everything starts with Blake for me. So this beautiful drawing, again, of measurement. I think all drawings are about someone looking for something, and something hard to find or difficult to see or say that gets put into the language of drawing, communicating beyond the failure of language. This is a very fine ocean map, an illustration for Lewis Carroll by Henry Holiday for the hunting of the snark. The crew were very happy with it because there's nothing on it at all. This is a portalon, so these long horizontal drawings, a navigational view of the South Foreland Point and Kent coast from 1840. There were lots of these in the Cook exhibition at British Library, if any of you saw that. I also included William Daniel's incredible project. He decided to sail round the whole of the UK coastline, drawing and writing the things that he saw. He worked out pretty quickly that he was going to have to do some sections on land because it just took too long. But this is him setting off from Land's End, perfect place to start. And this is J.M. Turner's a wreck also of Land's End, a complete kind of dissolve of sea and sky. Someone like Via Selman draws the surface of the sea with exquisite kind of detail. And when she talks about these drawings, she talks about them in a very kind of non-metaphorical, non-symbolic way. It's literally about the surface of the sea on the surface of the paper. It's quite kind of brutal the way she talks about it. This is a page from Donald Crowhouse's logbook, the last page of his logbook, actually. He was a businessman, an amateur sailor that joined the first Sunday Times Golden Globe sailing round the globe yacht race, and he was cheating. And there's been a couple of movies come out about him recently, actually. So he ran 2 logbooks. One was kind of trying to make up this full story, and one was trying to kind of deal with a sort of mental deterioration. So these logbooks chart this obviously very difficult period of time. Another kind of form of mapping, that cartography below the surface of the sea. This is Mary Tharp, a physiographic diagram of the North Atlantic Ocean. She was an incredible kind of geologist, scientist, map maker, who lost her position at Columbia University because the head of department didn't accept their kind of emerging theories about continental drift. So she had to take the whole drawing project home. And when you look at the size and scale that she was working on, and imagine these drawings kind of just draped all over her house, it's a really remarkable achievement that she finished these drawings. Rather fine drawing of a whale by Captain Valentine Barnard. I mean, it was such a joy to kind of sift through archives, sift through, kind of worm my way into various collections and look for drawing related to the sea, because I had a theme. I had a single topic. There so much to choose from, but very pleasurable experience of collecting. Had some scrimshaw in there. This beautiful Arctic tern from Audubon's Birds of America, which are on elephant folio size pages. So the book's about this big. You sort of, heave it open like a door. It's quite a remarkable book. And this is Johann Bayer's Constellation of Cancer from Uranometria. So looking at kind of stellar cartography to match ocean cartography. Drawing as installation by this artist Barry LeVay, 6 blown lines across the floor. Or drawing as a kind of event. This is a night drawing by Mimi Gelman, black and white photograph. She makes her drawings through following GPS positions and using drone photography. So the snow in the image becomes like marks on the page. Or drawings of things dragged up from the deep as well. This is Charles Thomas. He was an early Scottish natural historian, and he was one of the people on the HMS Challenger, sort of scooping things up. It was the first voyage just to look at the sea rather than to go and find land, and he collected many sea creatures that hadn't been seen before. A rather beautiful drawing by Sigmund Freud. He was a really good drawer. It's a drawing of a section of a spinal ganglion. He had a fantastic passion for marine biology as a young man, and his first job, he worked in an Italian laboratory at the edge of the Adriatic Sea, dissecting eels covered in slime and looking for sexual organs, which may explain some of how his thinking evolved. William Whewell, a mathematician, no interest in the sea, whatever, but became part of a massive kind of admiralty project to chart tides across the world. So massive kind of coordinated effort to get harbour masters and sailors and the Navy to keep tidal records for particular periods of time. And then he translated those into lines of time on the map of the globe, because if you controlled the tides, you controlled the ports, and you made more money for the empire. So it was one of the first kind of uses of big data that's understood and known about. It's also one of the first state-sponsored scientific kind of endeavours as well. There's a lot of firsts represented in this drawing, actually. And the idea that drawings can change the world as well. This plan of a slave ship used to transport enslaved Africans was an icon of the anti-slavery movement in Britain. And the drawing shows lines of bodies, black bodies, compressed like teeth of a zip, with a cross-section revealing how there's also vertical storage of this cargo, filling the boat in a brutal ergonomic exercise. And this drawing was published across media, newspapers, that was the media then, and had a massive impact and strengthened the anti-slavery movement well beyond statistics and passionate speeches. Drawings are also the idea of the drawing as witness as well. This is from the 9th century AD. It's a hostage stone in size slate, and it's an archaeological find that details a Viking raid made by a child. And children's drawings are still used or are actively used in war crime trials all over the world. Because part of kind of recovery for traumatized children includes kind of space to draw and visualize things they have seen as a way of some sort of catharsis in theory. I included engineering drawings. This is a fine drawing of the Forth Road Bridge, which is actually really, really large as a drawing when handled. More Louise Bourgeois, an obsessional kind of draftswoman from her Insomnia series. Really good thing to do if you can't sleep, is draw. Ellen Gallagher's Coral Cities, where she draws on images that pre-exist. A beautiful Joseph Boyce drawing of a seal. And during this period, I don't find writing and researching that easy. I only have a fairly small brain, but I needed to do something in my own drawing practice to kind of balance out the collection. So I was making this drawing series where I was taking out information. So the more I kind of filled up with research and the drawings of others and thinking about unraveling these stories, I kind of emptied out atlases. I mean, atlases become redundant fairly quickly anyway, because boundaries change. So I was sort of taking away, just obsessively filling up atlases, page after page after page, and they were all laid out across the studio, and I noticed that actually I could start reforming a map of continents and the globe if I start opening them at the right pages. So I ended up with another kind of world map as a composite. I was also making another series of drawings whilst writing Drawing Water that I was making with salt and ink and evaporation, so working with things like blotting paper quite a lot as well. So allowing a kind of tide to come in on the drawing and then just seeing what happened when that tide went out again. And working on sea charts as well. I'm also learning to sail, so there's a whole other drawing convention, which is actually about plotting courses on maps. That's another kind of drawing skill I'm trying to acquire. Quite a useful one as well, and there are consequences if you get it wrong. And I made that one as well. Oh, it's back. I'm wondering what's doing that, but I'm not going to wonder too hard. I make these drawings repeatedly. I call them my C mark. Like I kind of confessed earlier, I don't really draw landscape and I can't draw the sea either. But what I'm trying to draw is the kind of movement of energy or light across water, across the surface. And I made these drawings on tiles because we tile our wet spaces, our bathrooms, our kitchens. And one day I hope a swimming pool. I'd really like to make one of these for a swimming pool. So if any of you young architects out there get a commission and you think, yes, that would work, please find me. I made a piece for the National Trust where I cast a bell on a beach at Land's End, and that bell was shown in Somerset House, and it was rung at high tide on the river. So at the moment of high tide, whatever time of day or night, someone would ring the bell. And there was an accompanying digital drawing, which for me was my first kind of step into digital space, which I found just another very exciting kind of landscape, in a way, very infinite landscape. So I made a very slow drawing that lasted a year, and it was a drawing that indicated where high tide was on the country. So stripping out information from tidal stations around the UK. And that became part of this very, very slow-moving animation that moved at the speed of the tides that was available online. I then did a period of work researching James Lovelock and Gaia theory, where again my drawing practice was kind of translated and the mapping practice was translated into sculptural objects. So looking at the shape of the oceans, unravelling globes, using the convention of the globe, which is made up of these things called gores, the kind of canoe-shaped things that make up a globe if you fit them all together. But I just wanted the oceans, so I made 3 ocean bowls of the 3 largest oceans. These were just, this show closed yesterday. This is was at Modern Art Oxford. So you've got the Atlantic, the Pacific, and Indian, but they come from those kind of gore drawings of the globe. And this is a sea mark that's currently on show in Exeter. Like I say, I make this drawing a lot, and I made it for that space. And the other books I'm drawing at the moment are Rachel Carson's The Sea Around Us. You know, she was an incredible writer and marine biologist, and was the person that kind of started the environmental movement in the States by being very outspoken about the use of chemicals in farming and agriculture, and what the consequences of their use would be. The book she's most well known for is The Silent Spring, which is this environmental kind of rant. But she also did this incredible trilogy of books about the sea. And The Sea Around Us has been in print since the early 50s, and I'm drawing every copy I can find. And the other thing I'm just starting to explore, I've always worked in art education in one way or another. I ran the MA drawing at UAL, which is based in Wimbledon, for 6 years, and I've just been appointed Professor of Drawing at Bath Spa. But I am just starting to explore whether or not there's another way of delivering messages about drawing practice outside of an academic framework, where my own experience as a kind of lifelong meditator and how that crosses over with my drawing practice can possibly kind of be exchanged with people. So I'm just looking at that as a possibility as well. So kind of a drawing teaching role that's outside of kind of academic framework, that looks at the kind of potential for drawing to just make life a little bit easier. Yeah, so that's this is a drawing made through breathing. So I've literally just breathed into an ink blot and allowed that breath to burst on the page. So that was the last drawing I have. So I think I've about right time-wise. So I've said a lot. I don't know if any of you've got any questions about anything that you've seen. Oh.
I had one. Is that working? Yeah. I'll just maybe start us off just with a question about. We just heard from Andrew Holmes. You were next door about his amazing photorealistic pencil drawings, and that each one takes 300 hours. And I'm interested in that, in time, in the time embodied within a drawing. And you mentioned it a few times, which I think is fascinating, that perhaps what did you say? You draw something just to look at them. You talked about your landscape sculptures. You draw them again just so you can look at them. And I wondered if you could talk a bit more about drawing as an excuse to spend time with a subject. It also seemed to come across when you talked about the drawing of your father. The idea is drawing as an excuse to carve time.
I think that it is a remarkable kind of characteristic of drawing, how it de-accelerates or decelerates, which is the right word. It decelerates time. It just slows things down in ways that I think are communicable as well. I think even time spent looking at a drawing, I'm saying this, I'm slowing down as I say it, I realise, when you look at a drawing, like really look at someone else's drawing, you slow down as well. It's just a kind of resistance to the speed that we run at, and increasingly run at. Things are speeding up more and more and more. So I think drawing has an interesting role within that. You know, just at the point when you think, we just don't need this anymore. You know, we've learned how to do this, we can do it, we can click this and, you know, I don't know, cut and paste that or whatever we can do. We can render in so many different ways. We've got so many fancy tools at our disposal that we think are going to make it all happen much quicker and more easily. But I'm just not sure that's true. I think the kind of easier we think it gets, the worse the drawing gets. And I think spending time waiting for the drawing to kind of come, to be finished, to get to where it needs to go is never wasted. You know, there are moments of frustration, but, you know, I think that's such a kind of valuable experience, almost more valuable than the drawing itself, just what that offers an individual. And I do see drawing as a practice. You know, I talk about drawing practice a lot. And that practice also means doing it again and again and again and again. You know, I think we get very quickly frustrated if we don't get results. And drawing teaches you to be patient. And I think that's quite an important lesson. Again, when everything else seems to be impatient, you know, there's an area of your creative practice that you can say, no, actually, I've just got to spend the time with this. So I do think drawing is about giving yourself time to make the drawing, to see something, and it's, you know, that sounds like it's all about observation, like looking at something, which is one aspect of drawing, but I think you can spend as much time kind of viewing inward as well and seeing the things you can't see, actually, through your drawing practice. They kind of make themselves visible and communicable. And then they communicate to you as the person doing the drawing, and then beyond that. I mean, drawing's often very, very purposeful. You know, people make drawings because they do something, they communicate something in ways that language doesn't achieve as well. So I think it's a really important thing to develop a practice in. You know, I think it's wrong to expect instant kind of results with it. I mean, you never know. But it takes a long time to find your line, to find your mark, to find your own vocabulary. And it takes a long time even to appreciate the drawings of others. I mean, I think they communicate very easily and directly, but, you know, the longer time you spend with a drawing, unraveling someone else's drawing, thinking about how they made it, why they made it, finding your way into a drawing, finding your way out of a drawing, you know, it's time well spent, I'd say.
Do you have any other questions?
Hi, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned that there's drawings that you kind of don't look again. So, and you also talk about this idea of time, and I was wondering if you can tell immediately if you want to look back on a drawing, or what's the relationship to your drawing, if it's something that sort of changes, or if there's a clear division in which the drawings you kind of don't want to look back on, and the ones you kind of keep coming back to?
Perhaps it's a little bit misleading to say I don't look at them again, because I think maybe I would look at them again, but no one else would. You know, there's a sort of, I think I have a public drawing practice and a private drawing practice, which I shouldn't keep saying in public, actually. I just realised. Yes, because there are drawings that I feel probably... I want to stop talking. Probably just reveal too much about my kind of inner world that I think, you know, I'm prone to oversharing already. So, you know, I draw the line somewhere for me. So, yes, they might go away, but not necessarily away from me. But I don't consider them public work. You know, there's the idea of the presentation drawing. I know that's kind of a whole trope of architectural drawing, but I think that's true of my practice as well. And it's not to say I don't make drawings that are intimate and that I share, but I know there is a set of drawings that are for me only.
Okay, maybe something following up. Sorry, second question. It's in a way your relationship to your drawings. Maybe I'm trying to understand a bit more if there's something you've done before that you go back to, or things you want to move on. In a way, this idea, after you've done something for 10 years, you look back on it and you actually find something else. So in a way, I'm trying to...
Yes, I mean, I suppose the sketchbook is an important place for that. You know, I keep all of those, and that's, you know, where writing and drawing and thinking just manifests without me judging it at all. And I will certainly revisit things. And one of the things you often see, even you know, doing a presentation on work, you just see how you go round and round in kind of various spirals. You don't kind of escape your subject, but it modifies or matures or evolves, hopefully. But you often return. You know, it all comes from the same source, so that shouldn't be a surprise. But certainly within my drawing practice, I do find drawings again, and I'm shocked by them or surprised by them, that I'd been that honest at that moment in the drawing, or what I then understand about who I was at that moment. I mean, drawings are a diary as well. I can usually remember, lots of artists talk about this, I can remember exactly where I was or what was happening when I made that drawing. You know, it doesn't have to have a date on it. Which is another kind of strange characteristic, that you kind of re-enter the space of the drawing when you made it, which is, you know, another interesting thing, another reason for making them. And just for yourself as well. They don't have to be for other people. They can just have that function. I don't know if does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Firstly, you talked about the relationship of, or kind of one understanding of drawing as proof or truth or evidencing, and drawings being used in this way, and I think we're very familiar with that in the world of architecture, or at least drawings being used to make very clear promises. But you also use this very beautiful phrase, I think, my head is full of water at all times, which seemed to invite in this idea that other things might be making drawings true, and other materials and energies might be allowed to enter into the process of making drawings. And I suppose I wanted to ask if you could talk some more about the way you've tried to embrace that form of drawing in your practice, which is maybe less about controlling substances, but allowing substances into the process of making a drawing which is open-ended and which might be instructive to us. So it acts the other way around.
I think that's very well observed, what you've just said, because I would say I have a number of strategies in terms of my drawing practice, and some I impose a system on the drawing process, like with the book drawings. I'm trying to record signs of usage on an old book. It's very systematic. Even some of the mapping drawing series, very systematic and methodical. And then there's a whole other body of work which is process-led, that's much more like, the studio becomes more like a laboratory. Not that anything's repeatable, so it's not really scientific, but it's all an experiment, and inviting certain processes in, and being curious, what's going to happen when I do this? That kind of attitude, being open-ended. I mean, I think it's, drawing, the whole kind of contemporary drawing is a vast, open-ended, ever-expanding body of practice, where what drawing is being redefined constantly, which is such an exciting, kind of very specific thing about the discipline. And I definitely have a sense at times that I am just waiting for the drawing. What I have to do is show up at the studio, and get things ready, and then see what happens. Where that I mean, it's not always the case. Sometimes I'm, like I say, very deliberate, very focused, and know what I'm going to get at the end of the day. Sometimes it's like I'm here, I'm just a tool. Let's see what happens. Catch the drawing from wherever, and embrace that. Without, I don't judge that at all. Again, they may not work. I don't expect every drawing to work. I mean, that's another very kind of, okay, how do you judge one that's worked against one that hasn't? And these are very subjective kind of reflections, but also kind of critically honed. There's a sort of tensional paradox between knowing when a drawing's worked from a kind of very critically rigorous point of view, but also just because I love it, or yes, or, all that kind of stuff. And I find that's incredibly exciting. I love my job. I love that. Could be a day in my life, deciding, right, I'm going to draw today, and I don't know what I'm going to get. Again, I really love drawing, and lots of my publications are full of drawings for a purpose. They're trying to kind of communicate something that's going to happen, something that's going to be made or built, or something that needed communicating to someone else. They're very purposeful. But I think it's also an absolute joy to work without purpose as well and see what happens.
Hi, thank you. That was really great. I was just wondering, you spoke about time and slowing time down when you're drawing and when you're immersed in the practice. And obviously there's the water, so I'm thinking about tide and waves, and also the last piece about breath. So I was just wondering whether sound or music is important and plays a role when you're immersed, or whether you work in silence. Or whether it sort of sets a metronome, or I know for me personally, when I'm drawing, I need music. because it's
Yes.
to help concentration perhaps a little bit.
Yes.
But the way you work
I'm
is
only laughing because I'm obsessed with house music at the moment. I feel
It doesn't come
I've said it
across.
out loud, don't I? Yeah, no. Yeah. So yes, music is, but it varies. It absolutely varies. You know, it might be some kind of beautiful bit of meditative music or electronica, or it might be something that I'm going to blow my speakers on, or, you know, you have to stop drawing to dance. You know, it so depends. If I'm feeling if I'm sort of feeling a bit nutty, then I usually use Radio 4 to like get me right back down to earth, but that's just too depressing these days, so I can't tolerate that. Yeah, it might be the cricket. All sorts of things become the soundtrack to the drawings, but it is definitely part of the landscape of the studio, for sure. I also had a really slightly different experience with the ocean bowls. I was given the opportunity to collaborate with the remarkable composer Jonathan Dove. He's a kind of contemporary, quite kind of really interesting classical composer, and we worked with the Northern School of Music with these young singers. Then they made this incredible kind of improvised work around the bowls, where they were singing into the bowls, and I was just completely overwhelmed by that as an experience. You know, there's quite a bit of weeping from me going on. I seem to remember for the first time I heard it being performed live. And I just thought, I never want to make a sculpture unless someone sings to it. You know, that just, everything seems so congruent. And I'm currently starting conversation with a remarkable dancer as well, who was a ballet dancer and is now kind of moving into this very experimental, performative element, and she's starting to draw. She was in her name's Eve Musto. There was a piece of hers in the show I was just in at Modern Art Oxford called Loop, and she works with the vertical trapeze, and she drew with her whole body with graphite in this kind of piece that I thought was completely remarkable. I mean, a lot of the time when I'm drawing, I move like this. You know, and there was this incredible body doing these incredible things to make this other sort of drawing. And I'm hoping we might collaborate in the future. So that's another, you know, I'm really happy to expand the practice, you know, to the idea of it moving into sound or moving into dance is just, you know, thrilling as a kind of prospect. And relinquishing, it's very hard for me to relinquish the solitary nature of my drawing practice. You know, with the big commissions, the public artwork, you know, there's a lot of people involved with that. Fabricators, funders, stakeholders, commissioners. You know, I'm just the ringmaster. You know, I have this vision that I want to achieve and I have to push it through and negotiate with all these other people and situations, because they're often not in the white cube either. So, you know, there's a whole lot of stuff to negotiate with that. But the drawing practice is kind of mine, and it's my recovery space and my solitary space. You know, I never feel as alone as well as when I'm drawing. So it's quite a test me to think, oh, can I actually kind of do something collaboratively with drawing? Yeah, so that, but I like trying something else. You know, I drew as a child because I got bored, and I draw as an adult because I get bored. You know, and if it changes how I work, then that's all good. Embrace it.
Can I ask, I mean, I don't think you actually kind of touched on it, but it seems to me, I mean, when you put together water and drawing, I mean, it's interesting that, you know, water is one of the few surfaces that would resist drawing. At least if you take the drawing as like dominated by the pencil. Seems to me that somewhere there's another kind of more buried tradition of, in a sense, making drawing Well, first of all, linguistically, using drawing in the sense of make something appear, as in drawing upon, or even drawing up, sometimes drawing up water. I mean, so it kind of, you know, circles around something like the well. And that sense of drawing to make something appear sort of helps to get you away. I mean, one of the problems with the pencil, it's not the pencil's fault, I've got no argument with the pencil, but it's like the problem is that if you look at it like that way, you soon start kind of judging things on their capacity to represent, and then on their kind of whether you think it's a good representation. And that really, it seems to me, is not a very useful path to pursue. I mean, really, in that sense, drawing was like a kind of subset of old masters and the drawing techniques that went with it. They're incredible, but that's not the problem here. So it's whether there's a space for a renewal of the tradition, that actually there is this kind of drawing upon, drawing up, making. I suppose the crucial thing is really the sort of specialized visibility of something.
Mm.
I mean, you both identify it and make it appear in one.
I suppose, yeah, this learning to sail thing, I spend a lot of time looking at the wake, watching the line that is drawn by moving across water that then goes, and that chimes with my kind of something against nothing, you know, make a mark and then it's gone, that sense of transience, that sense of lack of attachment. These are things I kind of aspire to as a meditator. So that line is a line I'm very fond of. I'd also say the horizon line is my favourite line in the world, particularly on the sea. It's another line in the water that I identify as an important line for me. And the liquid thing, you know, making work with water, I suppose I kind of identified for me the idea of the liquid as being a kind of a sense of how it experienced the idea of the self, and that the self is in itself a liquid thing, and you know, the difficulty we have in holding on to liquid. You know, unless you have a container, you can't just hold it in your hands. You need some sort of container. I use vessels a lot, and I think of art as one of the most incredible kind of containers of the self. That how people kind of are embodied through their art practice is a kind of remarkable thing that we've achieved. And I suppose that there's something that flows, I tend to use a lot of watery words, flows through a lot of these works is kind of exploring that, and then how that might expand into all sorts of other kind of conversations about our waters, which are very troubled as well, with various social, political events or catastrophes, environmental issues, increasingly kind of populating the work. So what might start as quite a kind of introspective examination of self is becoming kind of connected to an idea of troubled water in a much more kind of expansive and inclusive way. And I certainly, you know, I feel like a drawing practice and a sculptural practice for me can look at these things in very different ways, very, you know, again, non-verbal ways, but can kind of witness our times in some way that I hope will kind of permeate.
Just in reference to what you just said, in closing to that question, I was wondering if there's therefore a political difference between the line and the drawing. And what would, if there is, what is that political difference for you?
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask, a political difference between the line and the drawing?
Yeah, I mean, with all the words you used in the end, the last 5 sentences, I was thinking of Christina Sharp in The Wake. I was thinking of Srida Niyamanis, Donna Haraway, and sort of the web of that conversation of bodies of water. But yeah, I was just wondering, therefore, in the effort of people working against the line, people trying to say that, hey, stop drawing lines. I was wondering if drawing and the line are different things. Or have to be different things.
Yes, I mean, the way you were talking about all the kind of inflections of the word draw, that you can draw up, you can draw towards, you can draw from. You know, it's much more expansive kind of idea of connection. The line is a boundary, you know, it is a very political entity. And even to think about membranes, for me, is more useful than to think about line. You know, a line is a singular hard thing that separates one thing from another. And I have to try and celebrate connectedness more than the things that divide us. You know, that's my position. So, yeah, I very much support that kind of distinction that you're talking about. It's not that I'm like would never use a line in a drawing, but you know, I think again the line in water is the most arbitrary kind of conceptual ridiculous thing. You know, the idea that you can divide one sea from another seems even more random than dividing one country from another with a line. You know, at least maybe in a country there might be a mountain range or something in the middle. But with the sea, we do divide them up. There are kind of lines that separate one ocean from another. And there is only one ocean. So how can we even talk about these different kind of bodies of water when water is the very embodiment of connectivity? And it is the connective element in the landscape as well. And then with the hydrocycle, how you think about the atmosphere and the planet, and yeah, it's everything about water is about connectivity, which is why I'm kind of drawn to it, I think. Yeah, and the line has a very different kind of position. It's the divider. It's very useful, but reservations.
Have you done any drawing on iPads?
Oh.
I'm fascinated by these sort of drawings of reflections in water, which you can do.
Is that a drawing, a printout? Yeah.
On iPad, if you download ArtRage, you can draw in any material. You know.
The thing about iPads, I've liked drawing on iPads. My problem is, what do you do then? It's all the printing. It's like, oh, I just want it on the iPad. I just would like a sketchbook of iPads. Yes, it's like, because I like the radiance of the backlit colour and things like that. You know, I like all of that, and the fact that you can make it sort of through the sort of haptic slippery screen and those. It's getting it out of digital space. I find digital space really exciting to draw in, but I don't want to take the drawing out of digital space. So, because that kind of defeats the spatial quality of it. So, yes, I've had a go, but it's not material enough for me. You know, I'm a maker. I like stuff. I like unexpected things. I like reactions, and I suppose you'd call them in some way they're chemical reactions. But or things changing, like evaporation or a wet drawing drying out. These are all things I can't make happen in digital space. I mean, there are other things you can make happen, obviously. And like I say, it was very exciting making that tidal drawing for me. But my main beef with digital drawing is getting it out and just being disappointed, personally.
Perhaps over one last question from me, but it seems like I often feel like the word drawing is too big, or it's trying to describe too many things, and I think, Mark touched on it. We tend to see it, especially in architectural practice, as a noun. The drawing, you have to do the drawing. Your tutor told you to do the drawing. I looked up. I like looking at what Wikipedia has to say about architectural drawing. It says there's a drawing that falls within the specific conventions of architecture. Okay, and then it says digital software has made manual drawing obsolete.
Oh,
which I enjoyed as a phrase, because I think what that suggests is if drawing in architecture is often used as we take the drawing to task. It's used for purpose, as you point out, many of the drawings you have in your book. We're putting it to work in a very kind of very direct way, as a tool. And a lot of the things you're talking about are the reverse. The drawing is somehow making us, in a way. And so I'm hoping that the fact that perhaps the putting the drawing to task is now obsolete in terms of hand drawing means that it opens up an opportunity for it to exist in its other realms within architecture. And I wonder if drawing should be reframed as a state of mind, or a space, or a process, or a transformational space of time, rather than as a thing.
That's a lovely idea. I certainly, I would recommend periods of that. It might not help when you're sorting out the plumbing, but there should be periods of that. And I think,
I CAD for plumbing.
Some of my favourite drawings are architectural drawings, actually, but not necessarily made that recently. And I think some of the things that I feel so depressed about in architecture are mirrored in architectural drawing. I think the drawing does make the building. So if a building is rendered in a particular way, that's the way it gets made. And I think some of the poorest architecture around is associated with some really poor drawing. I mean, the drawing works, the building works, but we can do more than just make it work. And the drawings that I think of that are just so inspiring generate the inspirational building. So, I'm really happy to be at the AA talking about drawing. It makes me think, oh God, well, this is so exciting. That if drawing has its own kind of status and value, and that attention goes into it, it can only lead to better buildings. If you can pour that creativity into the vision and the rendering, that will go all the way, that will travel all the way through. Even the plumbing, especially the plumbing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. It was absolutely amazing to have you here, and it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.